Oops. Okay, right, sorry about that. So I'm assuming no one heard me for, let's see, 4 minutes. Wow. I didn't stop talking the entire time or notice this. This is one of those instances where I planned everything ahead, right? But OBS didn't notice my microphone. That's nice because Discord did, but OBS didn't. Thank you so much, OBS. Yeah, I'm not editing that later. Fuck it. Anyway, today Theresa May gave a speech on Brexit, and there are quite a whole host of opinions on how this went. And some are summarised quite nicely with a meme, or a gif even, of Austin Powers trying to turn a flatbed in a very narrow tunnel. I'm sure everyone understands it. But it kind of... fuck you, Disconar. I'm going to time you out. Where are you? Hang on a second. I'll time you out in a second. As soon as I see your message, I'm timing you out. Yeah. Many of the people who were detractors of this have many reasons, and it kind of reflects the EU results. I'm not too dismayed by it. It's just one of those things, I guess. There is a comment that was left, and I did post a link to it, but no one... but because I was muted, thanks OBS, Jeremy Corbyn wrote a statement on his Facebook page, and it's right at the top. I did check his Twitter all day. He posted a video, a really crappy one, which I might address before we look at Theresa May's speech, which there's a lot of. Jeremy Corbyn wrote, "After 20 wasted months, Theresa May has once again failed to bring real clarity to the negotiations. Unsurprising, they can't put it all on the table." And worryingly, she admitted that her approach will reduce our access to European markets. Well, yeah, she did clarify that, at least. She read out a long list of problems but failed to provide solutions. Shocker. Particularly on the urgent question of preventing a hard border in Northern Ireland, which has been addressed so many times. And she does actually address it in her speech. Quite clearly. So, he also, the final paragraph he wrote, "We clearly set out our Brexit priorities in Coventry on Monday." Yes, and I did a stream on that, because I have no life. "Your priorities were to bend over and spread. Theresa May's only clear priority today seemed to be to tie the UK permanently to EU rules which she used to drive privatisation and block support for British industry," which is really interesting. Because you're a Remain voter, you're a Remain person, you are pro staying in the EU, that's you. But when it concerns privatisation, you're against it. I find that quite interesting, almost like you don't like the idea of people owning their own property. You know, not too dissimilar to people owning their own homes, like you do. Anyway, I did put that in the chat when my microphone wasn't working, so you can look at that later. I did notice Twitter, there is a hashtag Road to Brexit, which I think Theresa May was using. And it's kind of a, I don't really understand the point of it, but it does show just how divided, if you look at the hashtag, how divided we are. But also other people that have commented on the speech itself. And that includes, oh, you should have seen some of the questions asked afterwards. Some were very... One of them, I believe, a French lady, she accused Theresa May of lying to the people about the impact of Brexit, I believe. Oh, I was listening to it, but I was, as I said, playing video games. Very important stuff for me. Because I don't have a life. And hello, Tailed Feature. Before I forget, the reason there's no visuals is because I could not be bothered to print screen and put everything on the screen because OBS refuses to let me share this sort of window screen software capture thing. Yeah. So I've linked it in the description, the full text. It's on the BBC website. Which thankfully you don't have to have a TV license to read an article. How nice is that? So, a lot of the complaints from this would say that she didn't really clarify much, but at the same time, people who voted to leave have said that this speech is... It kind of basically just cemented what they wanted. Yeah. Promising, right? And I could have played the video of this, but again, OBS refused to do as it's told, so I couldn't do that either. There's usual bump. Okay, so I'm here today to set out my vision for the future economic partnership between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Yay. There have been many different voices and views in the debate on what our new relationship with the EU should look like. I have listened carefully to them all. What you should really do is go on Twitter and just watch the car crash unfold as people start to argue amongst themselves about leaving, staying, not accepting the result, or the obvious discussion of how do you appease 16 million people that voted to stay, which I don't think you can ever do. Let's continue. But as we chart our way forward with the EU, I want to take a moment to look back. Right, yeah. 18 months ago I stood in Downing Street and addressed the nation for my first time as Prime Minister. Which a lot of people would argue you didn't win, right, you didn't become Prime Minister from an election. Some question whether or not your credentials as Prime Minister were in fact valid until that snap election which made you look like a fucking idiot. Doesn't matter. I made this pledge then to the people that I serve. I know you're working around the clock, I know you're doing your best, and I know that sometimes life can be a struggle. The government I lead will be driven not by the interests of the privileged few, but by yours. Just an interesting thing. This is somewhat contradicted by the wiretapping thing that's been going through Parliament, doing its rounds. A reference to, I believe journalists were getting off from being sued for that. I think. I'll have to look it up later. Stupid yawning. Yes. We will do everything we can to give you more control over your lives, blah, 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 blah. Right, so this is all nonsense. Let's go to the bit before she talks about... so there's two little bits before, like, the 5 main points of this. We are living through an important moment in our country's history. As we leave the European Union, we will forge a bold new positive role for ourselves in the world, and we will make Britain a country that works not for a privileged few, but for every one of us. I think Jeremy Corbyn stole her slogan, or she's trying to steal the slogan that he stole from the Soviets, as I'm told. That pledge to the people of our United Kingdom is what guides me in our negotiations with the EU. A lot of people think that what truly guides you in your negotiations is the fact that you haven't got a bloody clue what you're doing. And I think that stems from the fact that no one knows what's going on, which causes people to start questioning things. You can't really win unless you publish, but you can't publish because then you don't win. Or win in the sense that you can negotiate the best deal. Yeah, that makes sense. So, there is what she calls 5 tests, and I'll read what she wrote, and said. And for me that means 5 things. First, the agreement we reach with the EU must respect the referendum. A thing I don't think can truly be resolved, because yes, we voted to leave, but again 16 million people voted to stay. How do you negotiate that? While the gap was about 1 million in voters, it was still close, and it showed how divided we are, with the bulk of the Remain votes coming from London, Scotland and Northern Ireland, well, Northern Ireland was actually quite close as well. But still, it was a vote to take control of our borders, laws and money, which later in this she talks about EU laws, and it becomes quite apparent that I don't think what she wants can truly be done without just staying in the ECJ, which is silly. European Court of Justice, by the way. And a vote for wider change so that no community in Britain will ever be left behind again, which is unattainable. But it was not a vote for a distant relationship with our neighbours. No, it wasn't, but it is certainly being spun that way by quite a number of people who don't seem to like the idea that people want to be national without being a part of a united state or a part of some entity with unelected heads, while using the same counter-argument against people saying that we don't have a democracy. How is that a counter-argument to point being a part of the EU is not a democracy? I don't know. Second, the new agreement we reach with the EU must endure. After Brexit, both the UK and EU want to forge ahead with building a better future for our people, not find ourselves back at the negotiating table because things have broken down. I assumed that the only way that would change would be if people start to elect Corbyn, say he gets elected in the future, and he decides to try and rejoin the EU. That would be quite the problem, and also quite the insult to the people. Then again, I saw something on his Facebook page, and it was a reference to the fact it's his birthday sometime. I think today, probably. Honestly, the fact he's still alive is a miracle. And someone in the comments said, I can't think of any politician that's as popular as you right now, with how humble and nice and outgoing and people friendly you are. And I was thinking, you clearly haven't heard of Tony Blair. That guy was popular on an astronomical level. It was ridiculous. I was 10 years old and I couldn't understand why this curly-haired prick was so popular. Let's continue with Theresa May's thing, because honestly I could be stuck on Tony Blair all day. Third, it must protect people's jobs and security, which I guess is again where the ECJ comes into it, because certain laws they have we should take or keep or retain. Because and Theresa May will talk about this. She does talk about having our laws match theirs if their standard is higher than our own, I believe. Which I think is a consistent thing. At least then it gives some clarity on the position of the courts. But at the same time, I think she also pointed out working with them. So it's possible it's not entirely the case. Anyway. People in the UK voted for our country to have a new and different relationship with Europe. But while the means may change, our shared goals surely have not. To work together to grow our economies and keep our people safe. I honestly, if that was written properly or correctly, I have no idea. Because you knew different. There is a picture that did its rounds, which showed where the red tape was on each of the issues, and which countries, other countries, had red tape on those issues as well. But most of the issues that had red tape on seemed like reasonable issues to be concerned about. So I didn't quite see the point of it. Anyway, fourth, it must be consistent with the kind of country we want to be as we leave. A modern, open, outward-looking, tolerant European democracy. If half the crap Jeremy Corbyn pushes is to be believed, then we're not tolerant. And then again, unironically said from a leader of the most intolerant party. A nation of pioneers, innovators, not that the Tories are any better. Explorers and creators. Well, there's not much to explore. A country that celebrates our history and diversity, confident of our place in the world, that meets its obligations to our near neighbours and far-off friends, and is proud to stand up for its values. Apparently our values include being little bitches on Twitter. That's a new one, though. And fifth, in doing all these things, it must strengthen our union of nations and our union of people, which I don't think is attainable. The red tape that's been mentioned are things that we're not going to budge on. For example, we are going to leave, the single market. We are going to leave the customs union. I would also assume, based on what I've heard, we're going to be leaving the European Court of Justice, or their jurisdiction. That does not appease anyone, especially those that voted to remain. I saw a number of tweets, people pointing out that we could still be national, still have our own courts, we could still have our own currency, but we could still be in the EU as well. That was a counter-argument of some kind. I don't get it. Oh, have I missed the chat? Your net keeps cucking you. Does it? My apologies. I have noticed on my internet down there it's got like 1 bar. So yeah, it probably is cucking me. Yay me. Here we go. Right. We must bring our country back, taking into account the views of everyone who cares about this issue, both sides of the debate. I think Theresa May covers this very well in her speech. But how do you address that line of working with those that want to remain and those that want to leave? Because most politicians want to stay. Most want to stay in the EU. So you have to wonder, how on earth is this something that can actually be achieved when you can't reach across both sides and get them to talk? In fact, I haven't seen that happen very much, which is a shame, to be honest. As Prime Minister, it's my duty to represent blah blah blah. Implementing the decision of the British people, reaching an enduring solution, protecting our security and prosperity, delivering an outcome that is consistent with the kind of country we want to be, and bringing our country together, strengthening the precious union of all our people. All of this sounds like... Well, it's already been assumed that Philip Hammond wrote this speech. I don't know what that means, but it sounded amusing at the same time. It just sounded quite soft. Like, very middle of the road. But there are... And I've got to find... If I knew where they were exactly, because, again, I was playing video games all day. There are a few quite key moments, points, and I think, yes, the BBC also covered this. Right. So I'm not gonna read from the rest of that because it's quite long. I'm gonna go to the BBC article instead, called a reality check. So they say here's some key lines from the speech. There is no escaping the complexity of the task ahead of us. That is a quote from Theresa May. The response is, there was a time when government ministers were suggesting that this was going to be the easiest negotiation in history. I assume Boris Johnson said that, because that sounds like something he would say. Just because he's a bit of a dick. But at the same time, it could have been easily said by Gove if he didn't like his job enough. So those that were claiming it was going to be the easiest negotiation in history, the rhetoric has gone. The Prime Minister suggested that there will be more difficult days ahead and inevitable points of disagreement. Lots of them. Like, the argument brought forward on Monday from Corbyn was a contradictory one. At one point, he kind of agreed with the government's stance on the issue of the customs union, but also wants to cherry pick which aspects of the customs union he wants to remain a part of or adapt. I think I get the distinct impression, based on articles I was reading before this as well by Keir, where he claims the Labour government is ready to take over now and continue negotiations. It's all bollocks, really. I get the feeling that it's all posing, and the opportunity will be presented to simply cancel the result, and just rejoin and say, yeah, we'll just you just fine us however many billions makes you feel better. We'll take it because we're just going to borrow it, and then when the Tories come back in and reintroduce austerity, which, by the way, David Cameron and George Osborne were celebrating today that the budget deficit's actually gone. We're actually in a budget surplus. So if we can get the borrowing down, or the interest on that down, we'll be much closer to a stable economy. Some are saying, oh, you shouldn't be celebrating that because of the years of austerity, but forgetting why the austerity was introduced in the first place. That is, however, a different subject for a different day. Another quote from Theresa May. As Prime Minister of the whole United Kingdom, I am not going to let our departure from the European Union do anything to set back the historic progress that we have made in Northern Ireland. Nor will I allow anything that would damage the integrity of our precious union. There has been a lot of discussion about this. It was in Prime Minister's questions from multiple people. It came up earlier in the week, in fact. It's been going on for a while because Boris Johnson opened his mouth again, didn't he? He's really good at that. Has this inane ability to just spew drivel, and it seems to stick in his opponent's face to the point where they use that as a weapon against him, which is always quite funny because I don't think Boris actually cares. But also he seems to be capable of arguing back, even when he looks like he's actually being fucked. The statement that she makes about Northern Ireland also featured when she pointed out that it will not be Britain that introduces a hard border. Okay, the UK has no intention of starting one or enforcing one. That's the stance. But if the EU chooses to do that, then that's their stance, their position, and they are within their rights to do so if they're not able to negotiate it to be softer. But I think I don't think the government can actually negotiate this position. I think it's going to be a hard border. I don't particularly care, but that's only because it's Ireland and Northern Ireland. I really don't care. Ireland has no money and Northern Ireland's a tiny, tiny country. So, there's another quote. Here we go. Read this one instead. The reality is that we all need to face up to some hard facts. We are leaving the single market, which will piss off the SNP, Labour, probably the Liberal Democrats as well, but mostly those two. Oh, and Nicola Sturgeon of the Scottish whatever party, I assume SNP as well, but she's the First Minister in Scotland, who's trying to draft some legislation to block Brexit. She's no better than any other idiot politician who's trying to get ideas above their station and ruin or ignore the result. Granted, she has a good reason because, she's a nationalist, which is interesting because so are the people in England that voted to leave, and so are those in Wales that voted to leave, and those in Northern Ireland. And let's not forget here, people voted to leave in Scotland as well. But you seem quite content to ignore that because your national pride is focused on Scotland and only Scotland. No offence to those that are Scottish, tailed feature you being one of them, but your First Minister's a joke. Yeah. Life is going to be different. In certain ways, our access to each other's markets will be less than it is now. A trade deal can be agreed upon. Maybe. But that's not a surprise, this comment. How could the EU structure of rights and obligations be sustained if the UK or any country were allowed to enjoy all the benefits without all of the obligations? Which I think is a reminder that you can't cherry pick what aspect you want. If we leave, we have to pay their tariffs, abide their rules if we trade with them. But if they trade with us, I've said this before actually, they have to agree to our terms. I should probably pull the chat up for a second. Oh wow. I'm using Ethernet, Skog, you bastard. Interesting. We're allowed to... It is actually saying video output low, which is quite a surprise. I haven't seen that in a while. I do apologise for that to the 11 people watching or listening to me ramble on. If this continues, then I will obviously I'll obviously end and try this again tomorrow, but I will persist for now. I do also agree with Dowling in the chat. The speech was meh, because I didn't really hear anything. I was listening in, and nothing stood out as something that could captivate. That's why it seemed quite bland. But she did. I think actually it proved the point was proven quite well when she was asked questions by the audience. Some she chose, others were not. And when she did, she instead of simply restating the position, she said, "As I said in my speech earlier, in my speech," you know, that was a common response. And if anyone's interested in a little laugh, just because this amused me, where is it? In the image, I saw on Twitter a Theresa May's big Brexity babble bingo. There are 16 tiles with terms that or turn of phrases or sound bites. Let's go with that. First one, deepen special partnership. Second, strengthen the union. Third, as I said in my Lancaster House Florence speech, which, yeah, she actually did say that. Fourth, Jeremy Corbyn really is a shit. Fifth, rule makers not rule takers. Sixth, betrayal of the British people. Seventh, help me. Eighth, falls on the floor crying. I'm not gonna put the numbers. Referendum results must be respected. Podium collapses. 5 tests, which, yeah. Ambitious New Deal. Outward looking global nation. We can't have it all. Will of the people. And I pray for the merciful sweet release of death. She said most of these. Honestly, the deep and special partnership, strengthen the union, as I said in my and then speech, because she did it in that freaking event. Betrayal of the British people, 5 tests, ambitious New Deal, referendum result must be respected, outward looking global nation, will of the people, and we can't have it all. All of those were said in this speech. That's 13 out of 16. That's not bad. Oh, sorry, 12 out of 16. 11 out of 16. I really need to learn to count. It's 11, yeah. That amused me. That was quite good. Where is it? Here it is. Okay, so another one of these nice little quotes. I want the broadest and deepest possible partnership, covering more sectors and cooperating more fully than any free trade agreement anywhere in the world today. And we will also need agreements in a range of areas covering the breadth of our relationship. Sounds like a relationship agreement Sheldon Cooper will conjure up out of his bottom. Anyway, I believe this is achievable because it is in the EU's interests as well as ours. Which I don't really see a problem with. But, and this is the obvious one, the the best way to achieve all of that is actually enshrined it's in the EU Single Market and Customs Union. So you want to leave it, but kind of the way it's phrased and taken, it comes across as wanting to be in it and not at the same time. Yeah. What was it? So I'll read. Actually, it's a good comment on this article. It was striking in this speech how much of the current relationship Mrs. May wants to keep, staying close, for example, to EU regulatory agencies, to environmental and consumer law protections, and to EU policies on state aid and fair competition. That actually is quite interesting. But the Prime Minister also reserved the right to diverge from EU policies where necessary. In Brussels and elsewhere, that will still be seen as cherry picking, which I also commented on. That some of the other comments she made, can be perceived and agreed it could be perceived as cherry picking. But if it is, then everything is cherry picking. I think that was a little shift of the goalpost, which I consider a little unreasonable. Not unreasonable, sorry. Stupid. That's a better word for it. Because you don't need to move the goalposts. If you believe something like that, then why not just carry on doing it? It is cherry picking, though. Excuse me. But the Prime Minister also was that right? Yeah. And will be unacceptable to EU negotiators who are determined to protect the integrity of the single market, which I get. There's a lot of money in it, most of it Germany's. So it's understandable you'd want to keep those coffers full, and also keep it sustainable, which isn't entirely possible. Economies rise and fall all the time. But at the same time, it's understandable that they would want to hold a position. I would have thought, though, and this is why I think it's interesting that they haven't budged with regards to the UK, because of how involved they've been, how long the UK has been a part of it, what the UK has given to it. You'd think there'd be some leeway, but apparently not. So it's nice to know that with membership there's no reward scheme. Let's continue on with another quote. Excuse me. The UK will need to make a strong commitment that its regulatory standards will remain as high as the EU's. That commitment in practice will mean that UK and EU regulatory standards will remain substantially similar in the future. And she did talk about this quite a long time in the speech. All of it essentially just sounded like adopting their policies where theirs are seen as better, or to remain consistent, which she did talk about, which I don't really care about. If their standards are consistent and good, then sure, why not? Enshrine it in our law. But I also think it was mentioned with working with the EU on something, and I can't remember what it was. Yeah, I'm too lazy to look it up. So the comment underneath that reads, "This was important. A bonfire of EU regulations is not going to happen," which is good. If there are aspects of the EU's laws that work for us and them and make it easier to work with them, I see no reason translating them into our law if our law is not already on par. Or if their law is not on par with us, it might be a good idea that they either raise their game, get good, or lower their bar if their position is untenable. But of course, try negotiating that one. And if the UK can successfully negotiate a new model of associate membership of EU agencies that regulate chemicals, pharmaceuticals and the aviation industry, large sections of UK business will breathe a sigh of relief. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, though, the only real concerns are Customs Union, Court of Justice and Single Market. Yes. Am I still streaming, by the way? Oh, it still says green. Oh, you're kidding. Mine said, oh, did it? Oh, dear, oh, dear. Okay. If it dropped again, if it does again, can someone nudge me on Discord, and I will end my stream because I won't. I'm not gonna. It would be a tad stupid to continue if I keep getting faulty internet. I would assume this has a lot to do with Mother Nature. She is a heartless bitch. And apparently EE can't maintain a very simple connection. Dickheads. Right, so Theresa May offered to pay for access to these agencies, and much of the expertise in the EU and much of the expertise the EU relies upon is based in the UK. But there are disagreements about the judicial oversight, which also then means what is the role of the European Court of Justice. And I think this has been a bone of contention for a while. For example, the European Court of Justice is it the Human Rights Bill? Is that something to do with them? If it is, but also they're blocking us kicking terrorists out of our country. Like, why on earth should the taxpayers here pay for these fucks? Send those fucks where they belong. Back to their country of origin, or wherever it is they started peddling their hate, and let them serve justice there. It's also another reminder of how much there is to negotiate in an extraordinarily short period of time, and why a transition period after Brexit will be so important. I don't really mind about the transition part. I think that's reasonable. Whether there is a short period of time or not, I don't know if it's a short period of time or remarkable incompetence on those negotiating it. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy to negotiate. I'm not that stupid. But I do think that there should be quite clear goals of things to be discussed, and if it hasn't been agreed upon within a certain time, you move on to the next subject. And then you come back to it later, if you have the time. If you don't, then I guess you'll never agree on it, and that aspect of the Brexit will be a no-deal element. Seems stupid, actually, now I've said it. So, another quote from Theresa May. "We recognise that certain aspects of trade and services are intrinsically linked to the single market, and therefore our market access in these areas will need to be different. But we should allow new barriers to be introduced where absolutely necessary." So the comment underneath this, and this one I saw many tweets on this, a lot of it just calling her out, but I got the impression none of them actually understood what they were talking about. This seems pretty reasonable. So Theresa May called for a bold and creative agreement on services, a sector of overriding importance to the UK economy. She mentioned two sectors in particular: broadcasting and financial services, that have never been properly covered in a free trade agreement before. Her argument is a familiar one. Restricting access in all areas of economic activity will hurt you as much as it hurts us, which has been said on multiple occasions, which is why it still baffles me when people say, oh yes, well, a no deal hurts the UK more. Because I think that's because it's been proven. Some economists have proven that wrong. Well, claim to have proven it wrong. She spoke of the UK and the EU maintaining the same regulations over time while accepting there would be consequences, loss of the access to the single market, if the UK chose a different path. On one hand, it doesn't sound like ambitious managed divergence. That quote is cancer, and that may not be acceptable to some supporters of Brexit in the UK. On the other hand, it does mean the UK sticking to some EU rules and not others, and that will not be acceptable in other capitals around Europe. Which I kind of get. There was a quote that followed that kind of fell in with that. That it reads, "This is a negotiation, and neither of us can have exactly what we want," which, as far as comments go, is kind of expected. it was always going to be understandable that it's not like we can just stroll in and be like, yeah, you're going to give us this, or we're going to give you a jolly good spanking. No, we have to accept that we're not going to get everything we want. However, there are things that have to happen. I'm sure there are loads of pointless policies that we can concede on. But the things like the single market, the customs union, those two especially, we can't shift on those. Control of our immigration numbers, when it's 240,000 in the last year, yeah, for a country our size, it's a lot. Maybe not for others, but for us it is. It's ridiculous. Anyway, I actually am not going to continue reading this because I think I've got most of the points. As far as I'm concerned, the speech was meh. It was built up. It was built up as this make or break thing. But I didn't really see anything or hear anything in it that got me wanting her to win or succeed or anything. As far as I was concerned, it just came across as every single talking point that had been restated. I know some complain that Boris Johnson wasn't there. Just to clarify, he was stuck in Hungary, courtesy of a blizzard. So he did actually have a reason to be somewhere else. He was stuck, which is hilarious. Emily Thornberry's probably getting really pissed on Twitter about that. Probably still not happy that she never got to ask him questions. If any of you did have a chance to watch, fantastic. If any of you do have questions about the speech, I'm curious what people thought about it. Because my view is quite simply that it doesn't really weaken her. It solidified positions on Brexit that most of us knew and wanted and accept. There is actually something else I could look at quickly. There was a link to an article I saw on Twitter from Open Britain. It's a open letter to the Prime Minister, and it was published today. Yay. And it's written... Oh, excuse me. There are 3 MPs that have written this. Vince Cable of the Liberal Democrats, Caroline Lucas of I don't know which party, and Chuka Umuna, who should have been, when Corbyn challenged for the leadership, he should have won it. He was the right person to win, but he backed out when he realised his personal life would become too public. I think he was a member of a men-only club, and he kind of was like, nah, I need my safe space after all. It's not a very long letter, but I can touch upon this for a little bit. Dear Prime Minister, you have been Prime Minister for more than a year and a half, and yet it has taken you until now to explain in any detail to the public what you believe the future relationship between the UK and the EU should be. This isn't entirely true. The Prime Minister has said on multiple occasions, well, okay, emphasis on in any detail, but she has specifically stated what the position is. The part that is contentious, the part that people seem to not want to accept, is the part where she doesn't explain the negotiating strategy, which I get, but at the same time, how badly do you want us to do in negotiations? I should probably stop moving away from my microphone. That's embarrassing. It was your decision to rule out membership. By the way, this is linked in the description. It was your decision to rule out membership of the single market and the customs union. Well, not much of a choice, really. We have to leave the EU. You can't stay members of the EU and you can't stay members of the single market and customs union and expect to prosper. We would still be bound to the EU without being members of the EU, which makes absolutely no sense. You can't expect us to do that. And I think people who continue pushing this idea that we should just quit and stay in it need to stop. Excuse me. Yet you and the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, have misleadingly claimed we can do this and at the same time retain all the benefits of membership. No, they might have actually claimed it. But we can negotiate. I know that doesn't really say much when you don't know how negotiations are going. You only really have what bits David Davis passes off in committee meetings, which are publicly viewable. But at the same time, we won't know what the end result will be until it's happened. And also you got to think that we voted to leave. We don't get any benefits of membership. You'd think that we'd get some kind of grace for long-term service to some bollocks institution, but we don't. You get more for being a member of the Beano fan club than you do this. Anyway, since the referendum, you and your ministers have made a number of promises about our future trading relationship with the EU. There are 6 of these. 1, the exact same benefits as today, which I think has been restated in her speech, and I believe I touched upon it earlier. Not entirely possible. It's not possible. It will be a new thing. It won't be the same. I don't think the whole argument of benefits is accurate. No hard border on the island of Ireland or across the UK. The government's position on this is quite clear. They will not enforce one. The only people that could will be the EU, not the UK. Of course, that has to be negotiated. Fully negotiated by March 2019, so they've got 12 months. That can still be done. We don't know enough to know whether they are actually getting much done. I know trade has come up now, but I don't know how much progress was made on the earlier stuff, like the divorce bill. 4, no payment for access to the EU market. Well, that if she ever did say that, she spoke wrong. We would have to pay for access to it. We would have to abide their rules if we want to access their market. 5, a complete end to EU rules and regulations. The Prime Minister did touch on this in her speech. While it was a bland speech, she touched on this by pointing out where there needs to be consistency, aligning our laws with their laws if their laws are held to a higher standard than our laws. Consistency. Yeah. 6, continuation of all EU trade deals and new deals ready to come into force. That one I'm not too sure about. Because if we're leaving, then of course this has to be negotiated. Do we keep those contracts in place, or do we... Well, actually no, we still could. But we'd have to probably, more than likely, have to pay the tariff on unless we're able to agree some kind of time period where we still retain the previous, not benefit, well it is a benefit, but for a period of time, a grace period, as it were. Good grace? Is that what it is? Yes, that. Listed below are the promises made by you and your ministers in your own words. We have grave doubts as to whether these 6 promises can be delivered, and we do not believe they are desirable. Spoken like a true Remainer. Or was it Ramona? But they are the commitments against which your speech tomorrow, which is now today, will be judged. If you back away from them, everybody has the right to ask whether the reality of Brexit matches up to what has been promised. Based on what the Prime Minister said, only 2 of those points have me curious. The exact same benefits as today being 1, and continuation of all EU trade deals and new deals ready to come into force. Those 2 intrigue me. The other 4 she touched on, she spoke about. Excuse me. So I think it's possible to question or press on number 1 and number 6. Yeah. But that's not to say for a second the answer she gave that would have covered 2, 3, 4 and 5 were in any way satisfactory based on your own standards. Right. The time for deceptive rhetoric and outlandish promises is now over. Sounds dramatic. There are only two options today. You must explain to the British public how you will deliver on the promises you have made, or come clean that the Brexit you and your ministers have promised is not feasible. Yours sincerely, 3 dickhead politicians. I would love to see someone stand up and say, and come clean and say that, it's not feasible. They did that, their career is over. I would be very surprised if any politician got this far into negotiations, a year in, and still didn't have something that was feasible start to form. I'm just saying that would be quite entertaining. Okay, so there is a bit more to the 6 promises underneath, which actually would then, I'm going to cover 1 and 6 because I think those are the 2 that interest me here. So the 6 promises: 1, the exact same benefits in our trade with the EU. Right, so there's an embellishment on this here. Your government has promised to secure a deal that delivers the exact same benefits as we currently enjoy in our trading relationship with the EU, including frictionless trade and no change to the invisible border in Ireland. And there are quotes taken from a Hansard from Davis, and then a BBC interview with Theresa May, and another with Liam Fox. So we're going to read the quote from David Davis. What we have, this is from January 24, 2017. So I would have thought this, I don't know, when was Article 15 enacted? Let's just say the negotiations are very early on at this point. What we have come up with, I hope to persuade her that this is very worthwhile aim, is the idea of a comprehensive free trade agreement and a comprehensive customs agreement that will deliver the exact same benefits as we have. That hasn't aged well. It's been 14 months. Theresa May's quote: it will be a different relationship, but I think it can have the same benefits in terms of that free access to trade. Yeah, they've all been caught out with these quotes. They don't at all. Which does mean that, considering what's been said, it's more likely these quotes are just redundant now. Position has changed to match the more skeptical view on things. Oh, here we are. Okay. So Liam Fox did in fact say something. It was Liam Fox, not Boris Johnson, that said the free trade agreement that we will have to do with the European Union should be one of the easiest in human history. Oh dear. I think Liam Fox is a Remain voter. Let's have a quick look. Liam Fox vote in Brexit. No customs union with the EU after Brexit. I think he's a Remain voter. Oh well. Let's continue with the 6th one, wherever it is. Where is it? Oh, I've lost the article, haven't I? Here it is. Right, so full negotiation, no payment, complete. Right. 6, continuation. Oh, that's a long one. Screw that. I'm not going to read all of that. Okay. The continuation of all EU trade deals and new deals ready to come into force. So, your government has committed to converting the 40 or so trade deals we currently enjoy with more than 65 countries around the world into new bespoke deals ready to sign on exit day in March 2019. Quote, from Mark Garnier, House of Commons, 23rd of March 2017. When we leave the EU, it's the intention of the Department for International Trade to carry over the existing trade deals that we enjoy through our membership of the EU. Okay. Indeed, Liam Fox has promised that all 40 free trade agreements will be ready to sign 1 second after midnight on the day Britain leaves. There's a quote there of him just saying that. Ministers have been absolutely clear that the UK will have independent trade policy immediately after Brexit. In fact, David Davis has pledged that a raft of new trade deals will be fully negotiated by the time Britain leaves the EU at the end of Article 15 negotiations and will come into force at the point of exit from the EU, which is good. Because honestly, I don't think any period of time where we don't have trade deals sorted is good. Not for us. Our economy would suffer one day. And there's a lengthy quote on that. Was two actually. So the second one reads from July 2016, just after the Brexit vote. Because I think it's just before Cameron resigned. Or, left Parliament. I think. The quote reads, and I'm going to finish with this because I have to be up in 5 hours for work. Now the new trade agreements will come into force at the point of exit from the EU, but they will be fully negotiated and therefore understood in detail well before then. And the same pledge has also been made by Boris Johnson, who said during the referendum campaign that the UK could negotiate a large number of trade deals at greater speed, and suggested that this could be done before we have left the EU. So there's nothing really wrong here. I am curious to see what Theresa May will say on this in the future, and maybe she should be. I might even recommend Jeremy Corbyn Presser on numbers 1 and 6, because those are the two that stand out. The first one with quotes, I'd have to read the Hansard all the way through to get whether the context is accurate, but at the same time those quotes are quite damning. And 6, the whole continuation of all EU trade deals and new deals ready to come into force. It's very murky, because I'm not sure how we're going to be able to maintain the EU trade deals in the long term. Because if any of those deals are long-term trade deals, will they be kept at the current rate, or will the EU introduce sanctions? That's what I want to know. And to address the chat, because I don't want to be accused. My stream has downs. Fantastic. Well, on that note, I'm going to end this, because honestly,